So, to kick off our evening, we have got a reading of a short poem by Pepper Trail, and we'll have a couple of these poems sprinkled throughout in between some of our other speakers. He'll introduce himself, so I am going to ask Teresa to get that queued up for us. Hey, Teresa, we can't hear the audio on Pepper's poem.
Right, there's a couple settings. One moment, I apologize. Let's see here.
Thank you, everyone, for your patience. We are still learning the Zoom ways.
Let's try this.
Hi, I'm Pepper Trail, and I'm glad to participate in this Winter Wonders presentation. I have a few winter poems that I've written over the years. I'm an ecologist and an ornithologist, but I also write poetry, and this one is called The Winter of Robins. This has become the season of robins, this winter time. Robins changed from the ways we have known them, grown strange in the cold, sturdy, dark, and wild. Raised from the customary earth, they crowd the trees, and the white skies are restless with their flocks, forever weaving through the ragged air, in and out of the quilted clouds. At morning, there is no end to their leaving, and in the blue falling dusk they return. The madrones are hectic with their wings, and the wild roses bend beneath their weight. The disregarded rise before us as a multitude, and so we are taught, and so we learn at last, the awe that was in the robins, always.
Thank you, Pepper. Now, our first speaker this evening is Kristi Mergenthaler, Southern Oregon Land Conservancy's very own stewardship director. Kristi is maybe best known around here as a botanist, but she also enjoys winter tracking, which is what she'll be talking about this evening. So Kristi, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you, Tara. Can you hear me?
Perfect.
Great, glad to hear it. So, gotta go the other direction. There we go. So, start off, I have a question for you. Imagine you are cross-country skiing in fresh snow and there's no humans around. And as you ski back, you notice an animal has been walking in your ski tracks. Who do you think that might be? Write your answers in the chat. So Tom Brown, a famous tracker, American tracker, who was mentored by an indigenous man, an Apache elder, describes tracking like this. He says, tracking is reading the dirt, the ground, the earth like a manuscript. Tracking is a way for you to, this is me talking now, this is not quoting Tom Brown. Tracking is a way to help you slow down, concentrate, be quiet in our jangly, noisy, human-centric world, and find some joy. Now you can track at big scales. You can do climate tracking. Here, during the Pleistocene, during a very long winter, glaciers scraped out this U-shaped valley on the Siskiyou Crest by Dutchman Peak. You can also track the weather. This rime ice is growing in the direction of the prevailing winds. It shows the windward side of this fire lookout in Klamath County. course, tracking. Can you guys see this RC? I have no idea where this RC came from. Do you see RC on the screen, or is it just me? Oh, it's gone. Goodbye, RC. Tracking, of course, is just a way to notice the beauty and curious things like teasel snowballs. But we're here right now this evening, or I'm here to talk about tracking critters in the snow. Now, this location, the snow had just melted on the Siskiyou Crest. I was walking on the Pacific Crest Trail, and I noticed a black bear was also using the trail, and it came to an extra muddy, steep slope, and the bear slipped down the slope, just like I do. Tracking animals can help develop empathy for the more than human world, our animal neighbors. And many of our animal neighbors we don't see because they're active during the nighttime, because they live underground, or because they're very small. So, wintertime is a time of less solar energy, less food energy, and in higher elevations and up in the Arctic and Antarctica, where the winters are more extreme, there's a couple options for animals. They can migrate, follow the solar energy and the food source to the south, or like in our valley, they can migrate down into the valleys, like our pine siskin stew and our deer and elk. They can hibernate, like our ground squirrels do locally, or hibernate a little bit, like black bears do here, and other animals like chipmunks. And they can endure, be active all winter long. Up in the snow zone, which in our area is usually above 4,500 feet in elevation, many of the animals are active under the snow in the subnivean zone. When you get enough snow over a period of time, the vapor and temperature gradients create hoarfrost at the base of the snowpack, open areas where mice and voles are wandering around doing their things, and weasels are going down to eat them. And if we have time at the end of the questions, please someone do ask me what one of my favorite winter ecology facts is related to hibernation. So the basics of tracking. The tools include knowing the natural history of the animals, who lives here, and which habitats do they use. Track patterns. Track patterns are really important in the snow zone. It's how animals use their assorted legs and paws and hooves to move themselves across space. Track prints are important, although in the snow, they can be challenging to have really good track prints. The prints melt out. They have snow blown into them. They can freeze and thaw. Hoarfrost can grow in them. So often they're not as easy to read as track patterns. However, in shallow snow, or if you walk and follow a track to a more sheltered area, you might find better prints to see toes and claws and such. And of course, there's the signs of animals, their dirty dishes, their bedding, their feathers, their teeth, their bodies that are important in tracking. So the first thing is range and habitat. What is the natural history of the animals? Obviously here in Southwest Oregon, unlike Alaska, we're not going to find polar bears. That's good to know. Also, how do the animals move through their range and habitat? Do they boldly walk through a meadow like a coyote, or do they go from tree to tree? I might add here the ethics of tracking, especially if you're a new tracker, is the best thing to do is to try to backtrack. And I'll give you a few hints about how to do that. In our area, some of the common critters you find in the snow zone, here is the list. I would say brush rabbit and Douglas squirrel are the most common tracks and signs you probably will find. I couldn't help but add, though, some of our birds that you will hear or see that are abundant during the winter in the mountains. Other tracks you might see in our area include Pacific fisher, if you're really lucky. The very large weasel, you might find the tracks on the Siskiyou Crest. Pine marten, I find pine marten tracks pretty often at Crater Lake National Park. There's actually a loop trail off of the lodge on the rim on the east side, where pine marten tracks are often very abundant. So, track patterns. Some animals hop, some animals lope, some animals walk or trot or gallop. Those are some of the basic track patterns. Here we have a brush rabbit, and it's hopping actually to the right of this picture. And I just wanted to mention a few things about trying to figure out direction of travel, which can be challenging in the snow when you can't see the prints very well. Now, if you see toes and claws, those indicate the animal's going that way. When animals step in the snow, usually when they first put their paws or hooves into the snow, it's at a gentle angle. And when they take their feet out of the snow, it's a sharper angle. So often there's a cliff where pointing towards the direction of travel. It's also helpful to know the track patterns, and that can help you with direction of travel. Here's a chart I made myself a long time ago to help understand track patterns. They can be kind of complicated, but those three patterns are the most common. So on to the hoppers, and of course we need a New Yorker cartoon. The rabbits, by the way, the cottontails in this picture that are not imitating humans' tracks, actually the tracks are all wrong in this cartoon. They should look more like this. This is a brush rabbit, which is a cottontail, but it has usually kind of a brownish tail and not a white fluffy tail. And in this case, in the snow, you can kind of see the toes. How they move is first they place their front paws on the ground, often kind of on top of each other. And then they swing their back legs to the front, and then they hop. And so you get these 4-track patterns, space, and then another hop. And this animal was hopping towards the direction of my glove. Okay, this is my high resolution graphics here. Other hoppers include tree squirrels, and around here up in the mountains, that would be a Douglas squirrel. And they hop also. They place their front legs, though, parallel to each other, and then bring their back legs over and then hop, versus the signs or prints or patterns of ground squirrels and chipmunks. Very similar, they also hop, but they tend to place their front feet at an angle to each other. This is also similar for voles and mice. We have the little vole tracks to the left, the front feet are at an angle. Mice, they tend to be parallel, and they drag their little tails. When you do find vole and mice tracks, there's often quite a lot of them going back and forth in an area. Okay, so on to those who lope. Our loping animals tend to be in the weasel family. At the top is an illustration of a short-tailed weasel or ermine. And notice that it places its front paw, and then its back paws pretty much direct register in the same location. That direct register is common for many animals in the snow, especially as the snow gets deeper and deeper. But you see that often in the cat family and the weasel family, and with gray foxes. The graphic on the left kind of shows that when little weasels and the bigger weasels move through the snow, they have paired tracks that are kind of at an angle. The short-tailed weasels also tend to drag their bodies every once in a while. And the photo in the middle, kind of not very good, I took it, is really what the tracks look like. They look like someone did 2 finger pokes into the snow and then 2 more finger pokes into the snow. And then there's those who walk and trot and gallop, left, right, left, right. These would be creatures like foxes, like this gray fox pictured, deer, cougar, wolves. And their tracks can be relatively complicated, but often very linear. So if you see the second track to the left in the graphic, the high-end graphic, there's a track that looks like a straight line. You'll see that pretty often with members of the cat family. And they do direct register. The next track off to the right kind of looks like a S. Sometimes that's called the C gallop. And dog family members, including your own dog in the snow, often when they gallop have these C-S shapes. The track at the bottom in shallow snow is a cougar. Again, kind of a linear walking look. Okay, moving on to signs. This is one of my favorite signs. Now, you see it during the summer, but it's from winter activity. So pocket gophers, they hang out and make tunnels both in the soil, but also in the snowbank. And when they make tunnels in the snow, they often pack it with soil. And these tunnels can not just be at the ground level, but can be up to 10, 15, 20 feet into a snowpack, as documented by the great ecologist and tracker, James Halfpenny. When the snow melts, you get these cool gopher eskers representing travel in snow during the previous winter. My favorite signs, though, are scat and droppings. And they can be very diverse and give us a window into what animals are eating. And maybe if they're eating something nearby or far away. Droppings of birds tend to have white washes on them. That's uric acid. The picture on the upper left is a northern flicker. My favorite scat that I found ever in my entire life is beaver scat, little woody balls. Many of us have seen bear scat on the lower left. Of course, this one is full of manzanita berries, and then the little dry bullets of wood rats. So animals that eat twigs and woody debris, you can tell a bit about their teeth by the brows. So on the lower part, we actually have 45-degree angle brows, and that is common in the rabbit family, but also the rodent family. Deer and elk, they do not have top incisors. So when they browse, it's frayed and messy and not as tidy. And within the rodents, we have big teeth like beavers who gnaw on aspens, but then we have smaller teeth, which leave smaller teeth marks like voles on shrubs. One of my favorite tracks or signs is the calls of the birds up in the canopy. That is an abundant bird in our conifer forests in the mountains, red-breasted nuthatch. This slide is pretty subtle. One side, we have the brows of tree squirrels with bigger teeth. On the other side, we have the brows of chipmunks with smaller teeth on pine cones. Okay, you might want to avert your eyes, but kill sites can have all kinds of interesting stories in them. And usually they're surrounded by many different tracks of many animals coming in to also feed. And the story continues even when there's bones, where voles and deer mice come and nibble on the bones. This animal was killed by coyote, and coyotes often feed from the back end versus cougars tend to feed from the front and go for the heart. Cougar kills often have broken necks, although you might not be able to tell. Cougar kills often, the animal is partially or fully covered with snow or other material. Really exciting sign is when an animal jumps into the snow. In this case, it's a Pacific fisher. And that little animal on the left was a Pacific fisher that was radio collared in Siskiyou Mountain Park up above Ashland. But you can find other snow angels of other animals, including, if you're really lucky, a great gray owl hunting a meadow at Howard Prairie and punching through the snow and leaving all kinds of interesting signs. Tree tracking, the tree on the left, this is a sign. The lower branches show how high the snow level typically is. The area of the tree on the left that has no branches is the part that gets pounded by winter winds and saltation and particles and snow and ice. And the top is flagged, kind of showing the direction of wind travel. On the right, we have signs of an avalanche. Again, the lower branches kind of show how deep the snow was, and an avalanche came in. A friend of mine who teaches avalanche classes shared this with me. And I do want to mention avalanche hazard. If you're playing out in the snow, even on really well-used trails, it's a good idea to take an avalanche awareness course. Here is a slab avalanche The threats of slab avalanches tend to be on steep slopes, 30 degrees to 45 degrees. There tends to be a head wall at the top and a run-out zone at the bottom. But even some popular trails, for instance, at Crater Lake, the East Rim Trail, there is an avalanche path right before you get to the near Sun Notch. So it's good to know about avalanches. And if you play seriously and ski in the backcountry or snowboard in the backcountry, please do take an avalanche level 1 course. And lastly, prints. You can do toe track math of at least the toes that will show in tracks, even though some of these animals have additional toes. So cats, dogs, rabbits, you get 4 toes front and back, although with the rabbits, the hind feet are bigger, and with cats and dogs, the front feet are bigger. Most rodents, but not all of them, have 4 toes in the front and 5 behind, and many mammals have 5 toes. Measurements, I noticed that some people don't want to take measurements, but measurements, as you are advised to do in any of the popular tracking guides, can really be helpful in distinguishing similar animals, pine marten versus a Pacific fisher. Some trackers just measure parts of their body, so they know the distance of their hand or a finger or something they carry in their backpack at all times. By the way, this is a track of a cougar. So here are examples of prints from a cat on the left and a dog on the right. So dogs have claws and they're out all the time. Cats have claws, but they're usually retracted. So if you see claw marks, more likely a dog. Cats tend to have very round prints. Dogs tend to have very oval prints. This illustration also shows the orientation of the toes to the pad on dogs is more symmetrical than it is with cougars. Cats. Cats tend to have a really big pad relative to their toes. And also on the front of paws, they have 2 lobes at the lower part of their paw print, versus dogs just tend to have 1. Negative space can be helpful in looking at prints. Here is a print. It's round. I don't see any claws. The pad is very big. This actually is a bobcat. Relative size can be important. We have a rabbit versus a squirrel right here. Here is a print of a snowshoe hare from Crater Lake. Their hind feet are very wide and furry. They're 4 to 5 inches wide. Here's prints of a Douglas squirrel. The front prints, which are the lower ones, have 4 toes and claws, and the top ones have 5. I do love the illustrations by Ellsworth Jaeger. There's bird tracking. Alice Jaeger likes to talk about bird alphabet. There's X's and K's and Y's. Some birds like ravens walk. Many of our songbirds hop. The track on the right is of a great blue heron walking. Just one last track picture. This is one of my favorite tracks. Muskrats have very fascinating tracks. This is my last slide. This is an old truck I once owned. I covered it with track stencils created by this great naturalist, Steve Engel, based on real animals. If any of you are teachers and want to borrow my track stencils, please let me know. Just want to bring your attention to Toyota. In the first O is a very round track of a cougar, and the second O is a very oval looking coyote track. And that's it for now. Other than that, Tara, can you let me know if anybody or a number of people guess which creature is most likely to possibly walk in your cross-country ski tracks?
Let me see in the chat if we have, oh yeah, looks like we've got a couple of correct answers.
Good job.
It is a gray fox.
Thank you, yes.
So congratulations to those of you who already had the insider info on who likes to follow Kristi while she skis.
Yeah, just me.
All right, and before we hear from our next speaker, we've got another poem from Pepper.
One of the very special birds of our region is the great gray owl. There's a very important population of this species up around Howard and Hyatt Prairie Lakes, and they are here all year round. They nest here, but winter is their most characteristic season. And this poem is called Ode to the Great Gray Owl. You are great with feathers, your bulk a weightless cloak, knit of hooks and barbs, color of broken stone, soft as rabbit fur, hiding your bloody heart. At the edge of everything, you wait unblinking, eyes centered in iron rings, invisible ears attending the whispering feet of mice within the snow. And then you are in the air, soundless, your feathers the stuff of air, your wings flare just so, you drop somehow to earth, legs suddenly long, driving deep, feet opening like nightmare jaws, 4 black fangs. The mouse in his home in the deep snow is pierced, pulled into the light, swallowed in one bite or two, and the owl melts into the trees, leaving in the white meadow the mark of an angel and a single drop of blood.
All right. Now, up next, we've got Libby VanWyhe, and she's the manager of the North Mountain Park Nature Center right here in Ashland. Libby has a long-standing interest in the deep connections between language, storytelling, and nature that show up in Irish culture. So she'll give us a little bit of background on that topic before sharing a story for the season and for the times. Libby, over to you. Libby, you're muted.
Okay, there I'm better. Okay.
Yay.
Hi, everyone. As she said, I'm Libby. I'm the manager at North Mountain Park. And for those of you on the call who know me, I'm a big lover of Ireland and Celtic mythology. So when my friends at Southern Oregon Land Conservancy asked me to tell a story for the season, I turned to my roots and I wanted to share something with you about the sacred trees. Hold on a second while I can share my screen with you all. Excellent. Can you all see that? Okay, I'm going to assume we're good. So in this time of discord and uncertainty, many people, including myself, are striving to bring our lives and our thoughts in harmony with the natural world. So I wanted to share a system of myths that has really opened me up to natural wisdom. The Celtic Ogham is sometimes referred to as the tree alphabet, and it's one of the earliest forms of written language in Celtic countries. The Ogham is an alphabet of 25 trees, which are native to Britain and Ireland. And these trees were sacred to the Celts. In fact, the very earliest system of laws in Ireland is very specific about exactly how you can use the wood from these trees, when you can gather it, what you can use it for. It just goes to show how deeply connected the culture is to its tree species. So as you can see in the graphic, each tree is represented by a runic letter. And in addition to being letters, each of the trees is also associated with a season of the year. So they are timekeepers marking the path through the 13 moons of the lunar calendar. And there's also a tree for every solstice and the equinoxes and the cross-quarter festivals as well. So what I find really fascinating about this is that each of the trees have their own personality and can be thought of as a pantheon of different gods and goddesses, each with a lesson to teach. And in addition to being a form of writing, the Ogham is obviously a calendar. It has deep connections to mythology and can be used as a system of divination. I wonder if you can see one of my little Ogham sticks here. That's one of my little set of Ogham sticks. So let's see, I'll switch to the next slide here. So the sacred trees have been part of my own journey to understanding myself and nature better, and have helped me find answers and companionship in nature. And I am very happy to share them with you. We're also very lucky that many of the species of the Ogham have corollary species that grow here in Southern Oregon. There are Pacific Northwest varieties of the Ogham growing right at North Mountain Park, including alder, willow, ash, hawthorn, hazel, elder, and oak. And I could talk endlessly about these friends of mine. Today, I want to share a myth with you all that features two of the sovereign trees. I had considered telling you about the oak king and the holly king, which on the surface is a very simple story, which is why I wanted to give you a little background in the Ogham first. And then in my research, I came across a really beautiful reimagining of the myth for the times we live in. So I must credit Unitarian Universalist minister Erica Barron for this story, which can be found in the Nature's Sacred Journey newsletter. So here's a story that's rooted in the Ogham, but spins the battle of the Oak King and the Holly King in a new light. So the story is told that in the beginning, there were two gods who were brothers. And like many brothers, they struggled with each other for ascendance and power. One brother was the king of the forces of life, light, and warmth, wore a crown made of green oak branches, and brought with him all growth and vitality, fertility, and abundance. And he was called the Oak King. His brother was the king of the forces of death and cold, the forces of decay and patience. And he wore around on his brow the branches of the holly. And he was called the Holly King. And these brothers were identical in strength. So year after year, the same pattern was repeated. Each year, the Oak King would grow strong and mighty during his time of dominance. The light would gradually increase, bringing with it warmth and abundance. And then at the time of the Oak King's power, he would be thrown down by his brother, the Holly King, and the earth would shift back into a time of resting and cold and decay. And when the land was dormant, at the height of the Holly King's power, he would be challenged once again by the Oak King and would fall. And the cycle would repeat again and again and again. Now, alone, these brothers were equals. But then there came the race of people. And the race of people observed the cycle between the Oak King and the Holly King, and they began to take sides. The people loved light and warmth, and they feared the darkness and cold. So each year, they would celebrate the victory of the Oak King, and they would mourn the victory of the Holly King. And when the two were struggling against each other, the people would lend the strength of their voices and their bodies, their minds and their spirits to the Oak King. But the Holly King was without their support. And so time went by. And over time, people's adoration of warmth and light only grew. And they began to invent new ways to find light in the darkness and warmth in the cold. And finally, if they wished it, they could spend all their time in the light they had created. They could be warm all year long. But their efforts to stay always in the warmth and the light, were not without their consequences. Generations passed and generations again, and people did not at first notice the shift in the balance, but finally they could ignore it no longer. The people began to notice that darkness was disappearing from the land, driven out by millions of lights that the people had created. Animals, birds, plants, and even people began to suffer the effect of light that was unbalanced by darkness. But it was not just the darkness that was disappearing. The cold began to flee as well. The whole world began to get warmer. Summer lasted longer, and the winters were warmer. Ice that had been frozen for as long as the longest memories began to melt. The winds began to shift in the world, and the winds that brought the rain and took it away again began to flow in unexpected directions. And the people began to see that their support of warmth and light over cold and darkness had altered the balance of the whole world. They began slowly, one at a time, to realize that the Holly King was dying. And for the first time, the thought filled them with fear. What would happen if the balance continued to be destroyed? Could they even survive in a world without the Holly King? And in the world of the gods, the Oak King realized the same. And though they had been competitors all these many centuries, he realized also that he loved his brother deeply and could not live without him. The longest night came, and the Oak King and the Holly King met again. But this time, the Oak King had no heart for the fight. He laid down his sword and spear. He came open-handed to his brother, who was struggling just to stay on his feet. The Oak King wrapped the Holly King in a tight embrace, and he promised to set aside their enmity and help his brother heal. And on the night when he usually claimed ascendance, he realized that the world was already too warm and already too light. And so he laid the great oak crown on the head of his brother, took his hand, and each supporting the other, they went out into the world to see what could be done to restore the balance.
Thank you so much, Libby. What an absolutely beautiful reimagining of that story, and so needed in this really challenging time. That is really a special tale, and I really appreciate your sharing it with all of us.
Thank you so much. That was a wonderful opportunity.
Well, we're so glad you decided to join us. And now, as we are transitioning to our final speaker, we've got one more poem for you from Pepper.
I understand that Dick Ashford will be giving a presentation on hawk identification, so I thought I would read this poem, which deals with the courtship of hawks at this time of year. The Art of Courtship. It is January. The ground is frozen beneath the snow, but the hawks, male and female, have begun to perch together. Not close, but in the same tree. It feels right, but also wrong. They have nothing to say to each other. They share an interest in small rodents, hunting them, killing them, eating them, but little else yet. In a few weeks, in the warming sun, circling each other in the sky, he will offer a dead gopher, and she will say yes.
I love that one. Now, as Pepper said, our final speaker this evening is Dick Ashford. Dick describes himself as a continuing student of birds and birding, and this evening he'll be sharing a presentation called Hawks of Winter. So Dick, I'll turn it over to you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, you're good to go. Thank you.
Super. There was some weird command I've never seen before. It said I was going to hurt you guys, but here we go. I'm still chuckling over Pepper's poem. Loved it. Loved it. I'm here tonight to talk about hawks, and notice there's an exclamation point. I believe that hawks deserve exclamation points. They are special, special creatures. We'll talk about some of our wintering hawks, and notice I've got our in quotation marks because they're not ours. And nor, having said that, do I think we would want them to be ours. They are wild creatures. They have charisma, and I think they would lose some of that if they were ours. So we'll talk about some of the wintering hawks we expect to see. We'll take a little time looking at dark hawks, what they are and what's all that all about. And we'll finish up with a little music, which I have cleverly titled Hawks of Winter. It's a slideshow I put together to synchronize with a song called Hawks of Winter. And it's my style as we go through this as an outline, it's my style to share some factoids with you. We'll try to make this information rich, if you will, so that when the family's sitting around over the holidays and you're playing your favorite board game of hawk trivia, and I know everybody does this, you'll be well armed for that game. So a special thanks to Kristi, who is the person who invited me to participate. Kristi is on my Christmas bird count team, and after it was over, she asked me would I do a pub talk on hawks. So I said, hey, I can do that. I'm a former home brewer. I know beer, pubs mean beer, and I know a particular beer, Red Tail, that's the most common hawk in North America. This could be slide number 1. I can do an entire talk on beer labels and pub signs that have hawks, falcons, eagles on them. And Kristi, of course, said, no, I want real hawks. In the winter, we start seeing some hawks here, and I want you to tell us about those hawks that we'll see. I don't want any of these artificial hawks on labels. So my next guess was to look at, if we look in our backyard now, we'll see some hawks that have appeared in the winter. We put bird feeders out with little goldfinches and chickadees populating those bird feeders. And the genus Accipiter has a couple of birds, the sharp-shinned hawk and the Cooper's hawks, who come along and try to depopulate those bird feeders. So I showed this to Kristi, and she said, no. She says, I know that you go over to the wide open spaces over in the Klamath Basin, and there's hawks over there that only come in the winter. Those are the ones I think we should talk about. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to take a trip. Some of you will recognize this particular road. This is Indian Memorial Road. And some of you might even recognize this is the relatively common green morph of a Subaru Outback, relatively common here in Ashland anyhow. That's my car, and this is what it looks like. We usually do a 4-car caravan and head over the hill, if you will, to the Klamath Basin, to the wide open spaces. And what I'm about to say, I'll reference mostly to the Klamath Basin because that's kind of what we see here in Southern Oregon, but the remarks really are pertinent to most everything west of the 100th meridian. This is a Western-oriented, even including those of us who called in today from Alaska. And even I noticed there are a couple of people from the East Coast. There's a couple of remarks that will pertain there as well. So here we go over the Cascade Mountains. And when we arrive in the Klamath Basin, and if it were summer, we would see hawks, eagles, falcons, harriers, but the soaring hawks, the birds of the open country, the ones with the wide wings that like to make their way all over up above us, looking down on us, there'll be only 2. There's the red-tailed hawk and Swainson's hawk, but it's not summer, it's winter. So now we're going over in the winter, and the Swainson hawk heads south. 95% of the Swainson's hawk population spends its winter in the southern Argentina. And in fact, here's some trivia for you. The first returning Swainson's hawk was seen in Anza-Borrego Desert on the 1st of February at the Swainson's Hawk Watch down there. And last Saturday, one was spotted at the Merced National Wildlife Refuge in California. So they're heading this way, but they won't be here for several weeks in our area. So does this leave our friend, the red-tailed hawk, all alone for the winter? Well, no, because up here to the northeast, there's some birds that come down for the winter. Ferruginous hawks, F-E-R-R, iron and rusty. And then from the north, the far north, rough-legged hawks. And just let you know how far north that is, I have personally stood on the shore of Hudson Bay in a town called Churchill, famous for the polar bears. I've stood there and seen rough-legged hawks heading north to breed. Think about that, heading north from Hudson Bay. So these are birds, if we were to have prizes given out at our little hawk watching outings for the person who came the farthest to the party, rough-legged hawks, they win every time. So there's our 3 soaring hawk species that we would expect to see in the Klamath Basin and open rangeland, open farmland of the American West in the winter. So there they are. And the nice thing, interesting thing to me is each of these species has a dark form. So there's what a dark form red-tailed hawk looks like. There's what a dark form ferruginous hawk looks like. And there's what a dark form rough-legged hawk looks like. So now it's not that red-tailed hawk's not quite as lonesome. It's got a couple more species for company and then a couple of different color morphs for each, which just complicates the ID challenge a little bit, but it makes it quite wonderful. So what about these dark hawks? What's that all about? First of all, I take this to be axiomatic. They are pretty. We like them. Now, why are they pretty? Are they dark and exotic and they're fairly uncommon? Maybe 10% of ferruginous hawks are dark, 10% of rough-legged hawks are dark, and a very small fraction of the red-tails are dark. So that adds to it, but I think in and of themselves, and you'll see when we define what a dark hawk is, they have a certain aesthetic, a certain beauty, and we like them. At the end of an outing, I'll ask people, what was your favorite species? And there's always going to be people who say, I loved seeing those dark birds. So they have appeal. Now, most hawks can appear dark. And in fact, probably have all experienced this. You're out someplace, you see a dark speck way, way up in the sky. And it's so far away, you get no detail, you see no color. And if it's backlit by the sun, essentially the part of the bird that we're seeing then is in the shadow. So it's just a speck. And as it gets closer, we might find out that dark speck was not a dark hawk. It's a light hawk, or it might even have been something like a ring-billed gull, which happens over in the Klamath Basin. So a lot of hawks can appear dark. What really makes a hawk dark? Dark feathers. Makes sense, right? On their head, their throat, their breast. The feathers that are under wing, not the flight feathers, not the feathers that make the bird stay up in the air and move forward, but the covering feathers under the wing, the underwing coverts, and feathers on the legs are dark. For example, on the left here is a light morph rough-legged hawk. Pretty self-explanatory. And then this is the same species, same subspecies. It's the same bird, except it's a dark one. And notice it meets that little outline of characteristics we mentioned. It's got a dark head, throat, belly, breast, And then if you look at the light morph, these are underwing coverts all the way out to those little feathery things. And whereas the light morph has just a couple of spots at its wrist, the dark morph has dark feathers all across the underwing coverts as well. So it's meeting our definition of what a dark morph hawk is. Here's a picture of another dark morph roughie, and I think anybody who was doubting when I said I think that they have a beauty of their own, there's something about these birds that's beautiful. Here's an example. This is a youngster. This is immature rough-legged hawk, first bird in its first year. And notice it meets all our definitions of where the dark feathers are. And here's a couple more. This is a female type rough-legged hawk, and this is a male type rough-legged hawk. So you get a sense of how beautiful these birds really are. Now, here's a couple of ferruginous hawks, and I have to navigate my screen here, sorry. Here's a couple of ferruginous hawks, and you can see again, they meet our definition. They meet our definition of where the dark feathers are. And then over here and here are red-tailed hawks. Now, a couple of things I'd like to point out are this beautiful ferruginous hawk that Nick Biani photographed in Butte Valley, California, near beautiful downtown Doris, California. And I was with him when he took this picture. This was in November. Notice it's got some rufusy color on there. And notice that this red-tailed hawk that Don Sutherland took this picture up near Bend, a lot of rufusy. We call this a tomato soup bird. And when people hear that the first time, they kind of chuckle, but then they end up using it forever. So there's a tomato soup bird. Technically speaking, it's an intermediate morph. It's neither light nor dark, but it's dark. It's darkish. So as compared to this one, which is really, really dark. So I'd like to take a look at our Western red-tailed hawks, such as the two we see here. So here we go. Here's a standard red-tailed hawk, light morph. Here's a standard red-tailed hawk, dark morph. And then here's the intermediate morph, which some people refer to as dark birds. I can show you field guides where all of these are considered dark birds. And this one looks sort of like cream of tomato soup, wouldn't you say? So it all depends on if it's condensed soup. Did you use water or did you use milk? Did you use half and half? And lest you think I'm facetious, here's a key word. The key word down here is cline. It's clinal. From this bird here, the light morph, to this bird here, the dark morph, there is a continuum of color morphs, a continuum of color morphs, so that if we found a bird that was right in here, darker than this bird, lighter than this bird, we can always pick another one that's closer to either one of them. It's continuous. There's no discrete starts and stops. If we said intermediate morph, it can mean, I make this claim, an infinite number of shades, if you will. And some of you who have been hawk watching or bird watching or may have looked at this dark bird and said, well, I wonder if that's a Harlan's hawk. And I know we have somebody here from Alaska tonight. I saw Harlan's hawks are a subspecies of red-tailed hawks who breed in Alaska, far northwestern Canada, generally. But they do come to visit us in the winter. So I'd like to take a little bit and look at Harlan's hawks. And when we're first learning about hawks, one of the things we learn is that, well, all Harlan's hawks are really dark birds, and they tend to have white streaks on the breast. And I remind you, these are red-tailed hawks. dark birds, white streaks on their breast, and then the youngsters, this is an imager here, very speckly, and sometimes this polka dotty, which I think is beautiful, also is on their backs and wings as well. So that's what comes to mind when we're first learning about birds, what Harlan's hawks look like. But every one of these birds that just popped up are also Harlan's hawks. So these are red-tailed hawks. Please note that none of them have red tails, and they are one subspecies of red-tailed hawks, and they're in the West. They're uncommon when they show up here. They're really super mega rare if they show up back on the East Coast. But Harlan's hawks are a northwestern breeding bird that visits the West and Midwest plains states during the winter. So just to show you how special Harlan's hawks are, here are some tail patterns from adult Harlan's hawks. And Bill Clark is the fellow who's been around decades researching this particular subspecies. Bill maintains that it's a species all on its own, but he's lost that argument to the American Ornithological Society. But here are some tail patterns of Harlan's hawks, but catch this. Those are tail patterns of Harlan's hawks. And you guessed it, those are tail patterns of Harlan's hawks. So every one of these tail patterns are tails from Harlan's hawks, adults. And Bill maintains, and who are we to argue with him? Bill maintains that no two adult Harlan's hawks have the same tail. I'll say that again. No two adult Harlan's hawks have the same tail. So if you get to see one, you're lucky. I've seen them in the Klamath Basin a handful of times. I've seen one right up here near Voorhees Road, and I think that's Coleman Creek Road by Edenvale Winery. I've seen one up there as well. Highly uncommon, quite beautiful. So, how do we tell them apart, all these dark hawks? They all kind of look like flying crosses. And by the way, I wasn't going to do any ID, but I heard Pepper say Dick's going to do some ID, so here's a little bit of ID. Here is a red-tailed hawk on the left. In the center is a ferruginous hawk, and on the right, a rough-legged hawk. And so one way we can start to distinguish them is by their shape. These flight feathers here, primaries are out here and secondaries are in here, and red tails are known for, I love to say this term, and you might all want to practice it at home. We say it a lot on our hawk watching outings. It has bulging secondaries. Bulging secondaries. And once you get that in your mind, that's what a red-tailed hawk looks like, regardless of whether it's a dark or light morph bird. Whereas a ferruginous hawk has long, slender wings, and notice how they don't come to a point like, say, with a falcon, but they taper down towards a point. Very distinctive, different from a red tail. And then the word that we use with a rough-legged, they sort of look kind of lanky, long, slender, not as broad as a red tail. And what that means is not only if you get looks, you get this silhouette, but it also means that it affects how they fly. So if you watch these birds fly, and that's what we're over there for, when you watch them fly, you'll get to see distinct, I hate to use this word, but I will, a distinct feeling of the bird's flight. And you watch the red-tailed hawk circle in small, tight circles, and you'll watch the ferruginous hawk have a little bit wider circles, and they'll glide like a jet aircraft. And then you'll watch the rough-legged hawk, which feels lighter. And I don't mean light as light versus dark. I mean light versus heavy. It just has a lighter feel to its flight. And then once we get past shape, Another thing we can look at is behavior. So both of these birds are rough-legged hawks, and rough-legged hawks are known for, as I say in my classes, their teeny weeny widow feet. These birds have extremely small feet for a bird who the wingspan of this bird is bigger than a red-tailed hawk, but it's got teeny little feet. The reason for that is, remember, they came from far north in the Arctic, the tundra, very cold. So where do we lose heat? And I take off my hat to demonstrate we lose it where we don't have much covering. So the small feet are an adaptation to the cold weather to help keep them warm. The other things that rough-legged hawks do is they hover. So here's a picture of a rough-legged hawk hovering. Many of you have seen kestrels roadside hovering, those little birds. This is a big bird, and it'll hover. And we can be half a mile away and see this going on. And oftentimes we'll hop in the car and go check it out because we know that it's a rough-legged hawk. So in addition to plumage, there's shape, and then there is behavior. And that's a way to bring us closer to identifying these beautiful birds. Now, here's our red-tailed hawk friend again. If it snows, look what happens. It's not the same bird, but the point is, when these birds glide or soar over snow, it actually reflects up. And in the winter, in the Klamath Basin, it's fairly common to see a really white-looking bird like this, and it's from the reflection of the snow. Here's Gary Schaefer, is a local Jackson County birder, wonderful guy, friend of mine. And many of you Southern Oregon folks on this Zoom have seen this bird or its descendants. This is a tomato soup, intermediate morph redtail that's been hanging around the prairies up at Hyatt Prairie, Howard Prairie, at the intersection of the road that goes to the lake for years, and several years it's been there. And this is the same bird, a wing beat later. You see what's going on there? There it is, a wing beat later, because the meadow was full of snow. So what happens is that the snow is giving a reflection to these feathers right there and washes it out. And the contrast with the fact that it's a dark bird, it's like a flag. It's just signaling us. So when we see that, we know to go look, because we know it's going to be a dark morph bird if we see it flashing like that. Here's a couple more examples. So there's a rough-legged hawk on the left, ferruginous hawk on the right. Notice these birds actually have a little bit of barring in here, but we're not seeing it because the reflection's off the snow. So it's quite striking. And again, I think it's one of the beauties of these dark hawks is the contrast between the light and the dark, and it just flashes. And everybody usually goes, and this is official hawk talk terminology, they go, ooh, they're really pretty, really pretty. And they don't have to be flying to be pretty. Those of you who are Facebook friends with me have seen this particular picture. This is a picture of a bird I took over Lower Klamath Refuge in the Straits Drains area. And these are a red-tailed hawk on the left, rough-legged hawk, and ferruginous hawk. This ferruginous hawk is showing one of its key ID traits, and that is, look at the big mouth, the big gape on this bird. This is a Colorado bird, by the way. All quite beautiful, I think, in and of themselves. Excuse me. So here is an adult dark morph ferruginous hawk. When I'm giving my hawk ID talk, I use this bird as an example. It's displaying several traits. If we were geeking out on this bird, on hawk ID, this is a good picture to geek out on. And they are quite beautiful. And I repeat, They are pretty. We like them. So with that, we go from this beautiful creature to a couple old guys. We're not quite so beautiful. Well, I would like to mention to Teresa now, if you can turn off that recording. There's a little copyright issue with a friend of mine, and I want to make sure we're not recording something. And this, I hope you can still hear me. Jen Hodge, singer-songwriter. It's actually Hodge. It rhymes with fromage, she says. And the bird chick is the way that Jen identifies herself. When I first met her, she was the education coordinator at Hawkwatch International and actually gave me some graphics that I still use in my basic Hawk ID class. And just last week, she is the coordinator of one of the largest bird festivals in the country, the San Diego Bird Festival. So she is a bird chick. So with that, I leave you with another nice photo taken over the Lower Klamath Refuge by Gary Schaefer. Love your neighborhood hawk.
Thank you so much, Dick. What a fabulous presentation and a beautiful song and incredible photos to round out our evening. And I will say that I am very glad that you threw in some identification tips, because I was just starting to despair for my own hawk identification skills with all of those incredible colors, all of the morphs, all of the variations. So I'm glad to know that there is still hope for me learning how to identify hawks around here.
Thanks.
So at this point, we are going to transition to some Q&A time. And as you are thinking about some questions that you might want to ask of our speakers, I just have a couple of notes to share with you. The first is that I want to remind you that the Southern Oregon Land Conservancy is a community-supported nonprofit organization, and we are able to do the work that we do because of donations from community members. So if you're able, I would encourage you to consider visiting our website. You can make a donation of any size there, and I'll put a link into the chat so that it's really easy. All you have to do is click on this link, come into the chat, and that will take you straight to our donation page. The other thing that I want to throw out there is, as you can see on the screen that Teresa has brought up for us, we have another nature talk coming up. It's going to be called Get No Respect, and we will be highlighting several different creatures and features from Southern Oregon that are sometimes a little bit underappreciated. Things like western rattlesnakes, poison oak, mistletoe, maybe some creepy crawlies. So we encourage you to save that date. It will be a similar format, several different speakers all on Zoom. And we've also got some other events coming up, like a work party. I was going to say a weed pulling event. That doesn't sound quite as much fun as a work party. It's a work party. It's at the Rogue River Preserve. If you want to get out there and, you know, get a little bit of sun, see some people in 3 dimensions, but from a safe distance outdoors, we would love to have you join us. You can register for that ahead of time on our website, on our events page, which I will also get into the chat for you momentarily. So I think that's all I've got. So if you have some questions, I can see we've got a couple questions coming in. That's fabulous. You can either put them down in the chat, or you can, there's a little reactions button down in your lower toolbar. And if you click that, there's an option to raise your hand, and we'll be able to see that you've raised your hand, and we'll call on you and we'll help you unmute yourself. So let's see, we've already got a couple questions about the best places to go hawk watching. We've got a generic question about the best places to go hawk watching, but also that we have a question specifically about seeing rough-legged hawks. So Dick, can you tell us about your favorite spots?
Okay, and I'll speak quickly because I don't want to take everybody's time, but a good resource for everybody is if you Google Klamath Basin birding trails. If you Google that, Klamath Basin birding trails, you'll get a website that has all those words run together. Klamath Basin birding trails. If you look at it, there are 40, 50, 60 driving routes in the Klamath Basin on where to go look at all kinds of birds. It's just an absolute, and it'll mention the species of birds that one can find on the various routes. But if you look at route number 41, route 41 is a good one, and 40, 42, those are good ones for hawks. And I personally wander. So if you come on one of my hawk watching outings, and this is easy to do, you just got to have a little bit of wanderlust, adventure spirit, is drive the agricultural lands, the ranch lands west of Merrill, Oregon. Look where Merrill is. It's above beautiful downtown Tule Lake. And look west of there near Merrill Pit Road. Those are wonderful places. And then specifically the question about rough-legged hawks, probably the best place is in Butte Valley. And Butte Valley is in Siskiyou County, Northern California, right near Doris, California, home of the largest flagpole in the West. And if you go to East Butte Valley in particular, that is probably our most productive site for rough-legged hawks. It's a regular. Thanks.
Awesome. Now, on the topic of rough-legged hawks, you're not getting away quite as quickly as that. We have a question about distinguishing a hovering rough-legged hawk versus a northern harrier.
Well, northern harriers don't hover. They will fly low to the ground. Coursing is the technical term for their hunting style. And when they see or hear, they have owl-like hearing, they will immediately stop and kind of hover for a second or two before they drop down. Whereas that rough-legged hawk will be high. It'll be way up in the air, and you can see it because it's such a big hawk. Those wings are maybe 4.5 feet long, flapping its wings. It takes a lot of energy to have that bird stay in place. So the difference is simply harriers don't hover.
All right. Well, that's an easy answer. Thank you. And we've got one more for you, Dick, and then we've got a couple for our other speakers. We've had several questions about where do you teach? How do I find out about his other workshops? Tell me more about how I get to hang out with Dick and learn about birds.
Well, in a normal year, remember those normal years? So in a normal year, I actually, I work with Libby, and I teach a class at North Mountain Park as part of the City of Ashland's Park and Recreation Program. That didn't happen this year. I also, in a normal year, once a year, Wild Birds Unlimited in Medford, I do a special talk on hawks at your feeders, but it's an ID course. And then most of my outings are through Klamath Bird Observatory, so I'll put that pitch in for Klamath Bird Observatory, and those are announced on the KBO, Klamath Bird Observatory website, but you got to be quick. We limit those outings for safety reasons. We go with no more than 4 vehicles. So, but that's the best place. So we'll pray for normal.
Yes, fingers crossed. I think we can all agree.
Yeah.
We are really looking forward to that. Awesome, thank you. Now I've got a question for Libby. So we have this whole alphabet of sacred trees. Do you have a favorite? Or is that like asking if you have a favorite child?
I love all the trees so much, but I do have a couple of favorites. I particularly love willow because the willow, because of its growth habit by the side of streams and bodies of water, it's supposed to be deeply associated with dreams and intuition. So, and it's connected to the moon, obviously, because of its associations with water. So I love that one. And also the elderberry, which has a very cool place in the Celtic calendar. It's actually the tree for the dark of the moon on Samhain, on Halloween. So it's a very wise feminine energy tree who's got a lot of protective qualities, and the berries, of course, are very healing. So the mythology is connected to, you know, the fact that the the natural history of the plant is really well understood. So willow grows next to streams and it's connected to dreams, and elder has these berries that are really great for your immune system, and it's a healing, wise old woman. So there's some really wonderful connections there.
Thank you. Yeah, I find it really fascinating how in a culture that is so attuned to the properties, like the actual properties of these wild species, that then we see those characteristics coming out in like the personification of those species.
Yeah.
Also, I'm very excited because I just planted an elderberry bush in my backyard this year. So I think I just brought some good energy into my home.
Wonderful.
And okay, we've got another question for you. Speaking of the tree alphabet, can you recommend a book or a resource where folks can learn more?
There are actually several really good books about the OM. And
Can you put in the chat how you spell OM?
OGHAM, and the G is silent, and just like all Irish pronunciation, it's completely screwy. Why don't I look up the book that I like, and I'll put a link to it in the chat, because I have like a few. So I'll pop a couple in the chat here.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And now, Kristi, we've got one for you. Well, you posed your own question, Kristi. So tell us.
I did.
Tell us the answer. Tell us the question and the answer.
One fact about winter ecology that I just find enchanting is that the Arctic fox, who hibernates under the snow under extreme conditions in the Arctic and has a very limited energy budget to make it through the winter, the cold, the ice that goes on and on, it warms up enough in hibernation so that it can dream. So dreaming is so important to mammals. REM dreaming, that they will risk extra calories and death to dream.
Well, I just learned my new favorite winter ecology fact also. Thank you so much for sharing that. I love it so much. And okay, great, Libby. Thank you so much. Libby has put in the chat a link to one of her favorite books on the topic. Awesome. So it looks like our questions are slowing down, but I do want to throw it out there that we're available by email. We're easy to find on the internet, so absolutely feel free to be in touch. And we are just so grateful for all of you for spending an hour and a half with us this evening, exploring some of the art and the science of the natural world here in Southern Oregon. So thank you again to our fabulous speakers. Thank you, Teresa, for managing our tech from behind the scenes. And have a great evening, everyone. Take care.
Kristi, Libby, and Dick, if you guys want to stick around just to do a little high five, just a couple minutes here.
All right. I think we're alone.
Awesome.
Teresa, you're muted.